The year was 1989. Florida back roads, lined with long stretches of pine trees and highway motels, became the scene of a string of crimes that quickly attracted national attention. Between November 1989 and November 1990, 7 men were found dead in similar conditions. Victims of gunshots fired at close range, their bodies abandoned near highways or in rural areas. At first, there was no clear connection between the cases. But the investigation would reveal that behind the murders was a single person, Aileen Wuornos, a 34-year-old prostitute who roamed the highways looking for clients. Aileen was born in 1956 in Michigan, into a childhood marked by abandonment, abuse, and violence. Kicked out of her home as a teenager, she lived through years of instability, committing petty crimes and surviving through prostitution. Upon arriving in Florida, she spent her days wandering between cheap bars, trailer parks, and highways, always looking for quick money. His routine changed in 1989 when he met Tyria Moore, a woman with whom he maintained an intense and dependent relationship. The desire to sustain the relationship, combined with a history of trauma, would become intertwined with the crimes that would follow. The victims followed a pattern: middle-aged men who hired Aileen for quick hookups in their cars. Shortly after, they were found dead. Their possessions, such as vehicles, money, and documents, disappeared. In later interviews, Wuornos would claim the murders were acts of self-defense. She claimed she had been attacked and raped by some of her clients and fought back to survive. Police, however, saw the crimes as part of a pattern of premeditated killings, motivated by robbery and revenge against male figures who symbolized her life of abuse. The hunt for Wuornos gained momentum in 1990, when the FBI and Florida police began connecting the murders. A witness description led to Aileen's name. Shortly thereafter, she was located at a biker bar, where she was arrested without resistance. The interrogation, however, revealed a crucial point. Tyria Moore, her partner, was used as a central piece of evidence by the prosecution. The police persuaded Tyria to cooperate, recording phone conversations that would lead Aileen to confess to some of the crimes. The trial, which began in 1992, became a media spectacle. Wuornos was portrayed as the first female serial killer in recent U.S. history, attracting national coverage that exploited both shock and sensationalism. In the courtroom, the image was disturbing. Aileen alternated between outbursts of rage and declarations of love for Tyria, who had betrayed her to the police. Her erratic behavior was interpreted at times as a sign of criminal coldness, at others as the result of a lifetime of abuse. The victims' families demanded justice, describing their murdered loved ones as ordinary, hard-working men who had crossed the wrong path. To them, the self-defense claim was nothing more than a justification constructed to cover up brutal crimes. In 1992, Wuornos was sentenced to death. Over the next decade, her lawyers tried to appeal, citing mental instability and a history of abuse. Nothing was successful. On October 9, 2002, at the Florida Correctional Center, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection. Minutes before, she had made rambling statements mentioning UFOs and promises of return. Her death formally closed the case, but it didn't erase the sense that her story was as much about crimes as it was about a society's failure to deal with someone shaped by violence from an early age. In public opinion, Wuornos remains an ambiguous figure. To some, she's a cold and calculating killer. To others, a woman destroyed by trauma who found violence as her only form of response. The case remains one of the most studied in modern criminology, not only for its brutality, but also for the psychological complexity of the killer. A grim reminder of how Florida's roads became the scene of death, and how a life marked by abuse can turn into a cycle of violence with no return. California, February 1994. In a quiet neighborhood in Canyon Lake, residents were accustomed to seeing their elderly neighbors strolling the tree-lined streets, living discreet and safe routines. But at the beginning of that year, the tranquility would be shattered by a string of crimes that would reveal an unlikely killer. The protagonist was Dana Sue Gray, 35, a former nurse with a history of emotional instability and financial difficulties. Divorced, in debt, and increasingly obsessed with consumption, she found in her elderly neighbors the perfect target to support a lifestyle she could no longer afford. The first crime occurred on February 16, 1994. Gray entered the home of Norma Davis, 86, a family friend and neighbor. Norma was found strangled with a belt and showing signs of a struggle. Nothing appeared to have been stolen, and police initially treated the case as an isolated incident. But in March, another death occurred. June Roberts, 66, was last seen in her garage talking to Dana, who had shown up under the pretense of asking for a book. A few hours later, Roberts was dead, strangled with her own phone. Her credit card disappeared, and Gray was seen using it to shop at luxury stores. The police began to notice a pattern. Elderly women, neighbors, all known to Dana. The motive became clear: quick cash for compulsive spending. The third crime occurred just days later, on March 10, 1994. Dora Beebe, 87, was found in her home, beaten to death. Once again, her credit cards were missing. Gray used them to purchase expensive clothing, beauty products, and even household goods, acting without any concern for concealment. Unlike killers who hide or avoid their tracks, Dana seemed to act in broad daylight, almost oblivious to the risk. Witnesses saw her in stores, smiling, carrying bulky bags, as the community struggled to comprehend the sudden increase in brutal killings among elderly women. Fear spread throughout Canyon Lake. For families, the routine of mothers and grandmothers became fraught with distrust. Doors closed. Phone calls became more frequent. Every single woman was now a potential target. The arrest was swift. Investigators traced the victims' credit cards and found clear records. Dana Sue Gray used them immediately after the crimes, for purchases ranging from designer clothing to small appliances. It was a trail of paper and receipts, impossible to ignore. In April 1994, Dana was arrested. During interrogation, she maintained a calm, almost indifferent demeanor. She partially confessed to the crimes, claiming she couldn't remember the details. Her lack of remorse caught the investigators' attention. The trial took place in 1998. Gray was officially charged with 3 murders and the attempted murder of a 4th victim, who survived the attack. The prosecution described her as a killer driven by greed and the pleasure of consumption. The defense, in turn, attempted to argue insanity and psychological disorders. The verdict was clear: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Dana Sue Gray remains incarcerated to this day in California, among the few female serial killers convicted in the United States. Public opinion reacted with astonishment. Unlike other female murder cases, there was no narrative of extreme trauma or self-defense. Gray's crimes were committed coldly, fueled only by the desire to buy. This contrast between the blood spilled and the receipts made her case one of the most disturbing of the 1990s, reverberating to this day in criminological studies. The victims' homes remain as silent reminders of what happened. Manicured gardens, quiet streets, closed doors, places that should have represented safety, but instead became the stage for one of suburban California's darkest stories. February 13, 2017. The town of Delphi, Indiana, was experiencing a chilly Midwestern afternoon. 2 teenagers, Liberty Libby German, 14, and Abigail Abby Williams, 13, decided to take advantage of their day off from school to hike the Monon High Bridge Trail, a former railroad track now a recreational spot. The landscape was both picturesque and isolated. Abandoned railroad tracks suspended by a narrow wooden bridge, surrounded by silent woods. There, the 2 girls were last seen. When they didn't return home at the agreed time, family members called the police. The search began that same night, but to no avail. The next morning, their anguish turned to tragedy. Libby and Abby's bodies were found in a wooded area near where they had disappeared. Authorities confirmed it was a double homicide. But from the beginning, crucial details were kept secret. What made the case unique was a disturbing discovery. Moments before her disappearance, Libby German had captured images and brief audio of the suspected killer on her cell phone. In the video, a man walked across the bridge toward the girls. His voice, deep and firm, said only 2 words: "Down the hill." These recordings, released days later, transformed the case into one of the greatest criminal mysteries of the decade. The public was faced with a paradox. The killer was recorded on video and audio, yet his identity remained unknown. The investigation mobilized massive resources. The FBI entered the case, hundreds of leads were analyzed, and sketches of the suspect were released. In 2017, the first image showed a middle-aged man. 2 years later, in 2019, a new illustration was presented: a younger suspect with different features. This change further confused public opinion and generated criticism of the investigation's conduct. Meanwhile, Delphi was under tension. A small town where everyone knew each other began to view neighbors and acquaintances with suspicion. Who could the man in the recording be? A stranger passing through, or someone from the community itself? Families avoided leaving their children alone, and the trails once used for recreation became places of silence and fear. The makeshift memorial of flowers, photographs, and candles at the trailhead became a symbol of collective grief. Libby and Abby's family maintained a constant media presence, pressuring authorities and reminding everyone that behind the mystery were 2 real teenagers with broken dreams. Libby loved photography. Abby loved art. The 2 were inseparable, described as cheerful girls with a quick laugh. For her parents and grandparents, Libby's video recording was seen as an act of courage, an instinctive attempt to preserve the identity of the attacker and ensure that the truth would one day come to light. In the following years, the case gained international attention. Online forums, documentaries, and TV shows devoted themselves to discussing theories: a local criminal, a traveling pedophile, even possible connections to other murders in the region. Despite pressure, no definitive arrests have been made. In 2022, police announced the arrest of a suspect, Delphi resident Richard Allen, who was formally charged with the murders. But the legal process remains ongoing, mired in disputes and appeals. The mystery remains open. The Delphi murders have become a cruel reminder that even in the digital age, with cameras, cell phones, and constant surveillance, the truth can remain hidden. The images of the man on the bridge and the audio of his last words continue to replay in news reports and documentaries, like a disturbing echo that never dissipates. In Delphi, the silence of the trail still carries the presence of Libby and Abby, and the town has been waiting since 2017 for a definitive answer that would finally bring peace to the families and reveal the man who ordered 2 teenage girls to go down the hill. December 2010. Police in the Gilgo Beach area of Long Island, New York, were searching for Shannan Gilbert, a 24-year-old woman who had disappeared months earlier after a desperate 911 call. During the search, they didn't find Shannan, but what emerged in those dunes would reveal something much bigger. Instead of a single victim, investigators located 4 decomposing female bodies, all wrapped in burlap sacks, lined up along Ocean Parkway. The women shared a common pattern. They were young, sex workers who had disappeared after contacting clients online. The discovery shocked the region. Gilgo Beach, known for its vacation homes and tranquil beaches, now hid a deadly secret beneath its sand. In the following months, the search intensified. By 2011, the number of bodies found had risen to 10 victims. Most were women involved in online prostitution, but there were also the remains of a man and a small child, further deepening the mystery surrounding the killer's identity and methods. Shannan Gilbert's disappearance remained unsolved. It wasn't until 2011 that her body was found in a nearby swampy area. Police said her death wasn't necessarily linked to the others, but to the public, her fate seemed intertwined with the others. The investigation was marked by flaws and mistrust. The victim's connection to online prostitution initially led to a cold, almost negligent police approach. But as the body count mounted, the case made national headlines. The FBI was involved, but conclusions were slow to emerge. Theories swirled. A single serial killer with deep knowledge of the area, or multiple criminals using the same location to dispose of bodies. The proximity to inhabited areas raised even more suspicion. The killer seemed to move confidently, knowing every access point, every hidden space between the dunes. For families, the impact was devastating. Many mothers and sisters faced public prejudice. Their daughters were remembered more for their prostitution than for who they were as people. Still, they insisted on sharing their stories, describing young women who sought support in difficult conditions, but who remained daughters, mothers, sisters, human beings whose lives had been brutally cut short. For more than a decade, the case remained unsolved. Sketches circulated, psychological profiles were drawn up, but there were no arrests. Gilgo Beach became synonymous with mystery and horror. In July 2023, a twist occurred. Police arrested Rex Heuermann, a 59-year-old architect from Massapequa Park, Long Island. He was married and had 2 children, and neighbors described him as reserved and meticulous. Investigators found hundreds of weapons in his home, as well as evidence linking him to at least 3 of the Gilgo Beach victims. Heuermann's indictment gave hope to the families, but it also raised new questions. Was he responsible for all the bodies found, or were some of them still linked to someone else? Visually, Gilgo Beach became an iconic setting for unsolved crimes. Narrow roads flanked by dunes, high sandbanks concealing secrets, and the constant sound of the sea crashing against the shore, oblivious to what had been buried there. For the public, the Long Island serial killer case symbolizes 2 things: the horror of a predator who preyed on vulnerable women for years, and the failures of a police system that was slow to act, allowing crimes to pile up. Even with a recent arrest, the families continue to await the outcome of the trial, and the shadow that hangs over Gilgo Beach remains. A reminder that, however visible the landscape, darker secrets may lie buried just beneath the surface. Sacramento, California, 1980s. On a quiet street surrounded by trees and modest houses, a boarding house was run by a respectable-looking woman, Dorothea Puente. Her white hair was neatly combed, her dress was modest, and her manners were polished. In the eyes of her neighbors, she was a charitable woman who offered shelter to the elderly, the mentally ill, and the homeless. But behind the facade of kindness, a macabre routine hid. Between 1982 and 1988, tenants began disappearing from Puente's house. Many were vulnerable men and women, without close families, dependent on her care. When questioned, Dorothea always calmly responded, "They left, they moved, they didn't want to let us know." The disappearances went unnoticed for some time, but there was one detail that caught everyone's attention. Even after the tenants left, Social Security benefit checks continued to arrive, and they were all deposited into accounts linked to Puente itself. The mystery came to light in November 1988, when police were investigating the disappearance of Alvaro Montoya, a mentally disabled man who had lived at the boarding house. While searching the property's backyard, detectives noticed disturbed earth. They decided to dig. What they found revealed the extent of the crimes. Bodies buried in the garden, wrapped in sheets and plastic. At the end of the excavations, 7 victims were discovered in the backyard. 2 other deaths were also linked to Puente, bringing the total number of confirmed murders to 9. The scene contrasted sharply with the community's image of her. While neighbors described Dorothea as a kindly woman, investigators found evidence of a murderess exploiting the weakest to sustain a comfortable lifestyle. The modus operandi was simple and cruel. Puente provided room and board. Then he administered excessive doses of medication or poison, leading to the deaths of the tenants. He then buried the bodies in his own backyard and continued receiving his social benefits. The trial, which began in 1992, attracted widespread media attention. Images of Dorothea, sitting calmly in court, dressed as an ordinary grandmother, caused unrest. How could this elderly woman have committed so many crimes in silence, without arousing suspicion for so long? Victims' families packed the hearings, seeking answers and justice. Many wondered why no one had noticed the pattern before. Police and social services were criticized for not investigating the disappearances more thoroughly. Dorothea Puente was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In later interviews, she denied responsibility for the deaths, claiming she had never killed anyone, only cared for the tenants. Her denials, however, contrasted with the evidence found in her backyard. In 2011, Puente died in prison, aged 82. The incident left deep scars. Her home, located on F Street in Sacramento, became a morbid visiting spot, surrounded by curiosity and fear. For many, that address symbolizes the vulnerability of the forgotten. The elderly, the sick, and the homeless who, without a voice or protection, became victims of a woman who used compassion as a disguise. To this day, Dorothea Puente is remembered as one of the most disturbing examples of a female serial killer in the United States. Not for the weapons she used, nor for her explicit brutality, but for the calculated coldness of turning a home into a death trap.